Hello everybody, let's get straight into it. If you want to follow along, I am using Unity 2021.3.9F1. So we'll start by creating the folder hierarchy. Start off with, we'll create a folder which we'll just call Image Alpha Editor. Inside that folder, we'll create another two folders. This one we'll call Resources. And the other one we'll call Scripts. Resources folder, we'll create another folder. We'll just call Style. And second folder we'll call UI Documents. Inside the Scripts folder, we're going to create another folder called Editor. Outside of the Editor folder, just here, we'll just create a shader, a compute shader, and we'll just call this Alpha Edit. Inside the Editor script folder, create a C# script. We'll call this Image Alpha Editor. Inside the Resources folder, in UI Documents, create a UI document. And we'll call this Image Alpha Editor Window. And in the Style folder, we'll create a style sheet and we'll call it Alpha Editor Styles. In the Resources folder, we're going to put a checkerboard background that I've supplied a link to in the description. So just download this texture that I provided from the link in the description. Just click up here to download it. Once you've downloaded it, just drag it into the root of the Resources folder. Now that should be all the files we require to complete this project. So your hierarchy and files should look like this. A folder called Image Alpha Editor with two folders inside, Resources and Scripts. Inside the Resources folder, there are two folders, Style and UI Documents, and a transparent background that you downloaded from that Google link I provided. Inside of Style, there is a style sheet called Alpha Editor Styles. Inside UI Documents, there is a UI document named Image Alpha Editor Window. The Scripts folder in the root, there is a compute shader called Alpha Edit. And inside the Editor folder, there is one C# script called Image Alpha Editor. The next step is design how our editor window will look. So open up the Image Alpha Editor UI document and UI Builder. One of the best features of UI Toolkit is having this what you see is what you get UI Builder. So now you don't have to really rely on your mind's eye to imagine what your editor window is going to look like. You can design the appearance of your editor window before you actually do the coding. So first we're going to add our style sheet up here. So add existing USS and Resources, Style, Alpha Editor Style. Next up in the hierarchy in this Image Alpha Editor Window.uxml, you can just click on that and we'll set our canvas size. So I've already set it to 320 and 550. So this is roughly the dimensions we're going to be working with when we create our editor window. The first element we'll add to it is a label. We'll rename this label to title. And in the text field, we'll just put in Image Alpha Editor. In the Add New selector in the top left, we're going to put in the name title. So this selector is going to be a simple selector, which is just the name type selector. So you need the hash symbol at the front and just the name of the visual element that we're creating a selector for. You can delete this visual element up the top. So click on the selector and we'll start editing some values. On the size, we're going to give it a height of 50. Text, we're going to make the size 30. And we'll make it bold. And we'll make it centered. The background color, we'll just set it to black. In the border radius, we'll just set that to 5. And text will align it to the middle. So save that. And you'll see in the USS preview that all of those style changes has been populated in this style sheet. Go back to UI Builder. So in these library settings here, we'll add editor extension authoring. So you can now use the editor and any controls in this document. And we'll add a drop down. And we'll rename this to texture option, which is written in kebab case. So there is like a hyphen as the separator and all the words are in lowercase. For the label, we'll just rename that to texture option. The index will be set at 0. And in choices, you put in strings, which are separated by a comma. So we'll put in 2 choices. First one is generate new texture. And the second will be load texture. Next, we'll drag a visual element into the hierarchy underneath. And we'll rename this one to custom text values. And inside the flex, we'll change the direction to be a row going left to right. Next, we'll drag an integer field as a child of custom text values. We'll also drag another one underneath that, and then a button underneath that. So all these 3 elements should be a child of custom text values. And we'll rename this one to width field. Second one, we'll rename it to height field. And this button, we'll rename it to create text button. As you can see, those last 3 visual elements we applied has just gone outside the bounds of what we wanted to design for. So we're going to correct this by adding a selector. So I put in width field, then you use a right angle bracket, and then we're going to put in label. So this is a complex selector where the first selector is width field, which is using a name type selector. We use an angle bracket as we are targeting a direct descendant of the initial selector. And what we are targeting is a label, which is a type selector. So we are targeting this label here when we use this complex selector. So we'll change this so that the minimum width and maximum width is going to be 40. And we're going to duplicate this and we'll rename it. So that is also affecting the height field. And for our create text button, we'll set the flex grow to 1. So it takes up the remainder space. Now in our width field, we'll just change the label name to width. And in the height field, we'll just change the name to height. And on our width field, we'll set our flex grow to 1. And also our height, we'll set the flex grow to 1. And then on our create text button, we're just going to set the text to create texture. Now it should look like this. Next in our hierarchy, we will add in an object field. And we'll rename this to texture field. And we'll change the text of the label just to be texture. So to make this object field validate for texture types, we need to put the assembly qualified name in this type input field here. Now, an easy way to get the assembly qualified name was just to create a small script, which I just called identify type string, and all it's doing is just debugging out what the assembly qualified name is of type texture 2D. So I attach that just to a main camera in a scene. If I play that, it says that the assembly qualified name is unityengine.texture2d with a comma and then Unity Engine core module. So this is the information we require, those two strings there. I'm just going to copy that. And in type, I'll just paste that there. So it is unityengine.texture2d, comma, unityengine.core module. And when we save this, drop as none texture2d in here. Next, we'll add a drop down to the hierarchy. I'll rename this to alpha dropdown. I'm going to change the label name to alpha option. The index will be 0. And we'll add in these choices. Alpha whole. And we separate these choices by a comma. Gradient right. Gradient left. Gradient bottom. And gradient top. So alpha whole is us just altering the opacity of the texture we create or load in as a whole. Gradient right is applying a gradient that goes from left to right. Gradient left means it goes from right to left. Gradient bottom means it goes from a direction of top to bottom. And gradient top goes in the direction of bottom to top. Next, we'll add an integer slider to the hierarchy. I'll rename this to alpha slider with a label of alpha and a value of 255, so our texture will be fully opaque initially. Low value of 0 and a high value of 255. Instead of checking this box, the show input field, we're just going to manually add 1 to our slider. Just be an integer field. And we're going to rename this to alpha input. We added our own so we could rename this, which makes it easier to target this Unity text input with a custom selector. So we're going to add a new selector, which will be alpha input, right angle bracket, then Unity text input. So with this style selector, we're just going to alter the size. We're going to have a min and max width of 30, size of 30, with a left margin of 5 pixels. And then on our alpha input, we're just going to remove this text from our label, so it should now appear like this. Next, we are going to drag a gradient field to the hierarchy. Then we'll just drag a visual element to our hierarchy. I'm going to rename this to preview area. And I'll give it a height of 350. Then we'll drag in a color field. Make a child of preview area. And we'll rename this to tint. Then we'll drag in another visual element, which will go underneath tint. I'm going to rename this to preview pane. And we'll set its flex to value of 1 in grow. And then we'll set the background image to be this transparent background which you should have downloaded. And then we'll drag another visual element, which will be a child of preview pane, which we will rename to image preview. And we'll set the height and width to 300 each. And back on the preview pane, we will set the alignment for this to be center and center. So it should appear in the center like that. Next, we'll just add a visual element to the hierarchy. And to that, we'll add a button as a child of it. Visual element, we'll just set the flex grow to 1. And the button we will just rename to export button. Save that. And this is essentially what our image alpha editor window will appear like. So I'll just expand these so you can make sure you have the exact same hierarchy that I have. That brings us to the end of this segment. Like, subscribe, and hit the bell notification icon, and I'll see you in the next one. Peace.